applicant for Delaware. We're going to record today's meeting so that we can send it out afterwards to everyone who attended in case you forget what we talked about or need a reminder or want to share it with other folks at your organization. By attending today, you are allowed and able to apply for new Continuum of Care homeless assistance funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. On a couple of weeks ago, on July 23rd, we released our request for proposals and RFP for new projects to apply for Continuum of Care funds. This is something that we do every year as the Continuum of Care collaborative applicant. And I'm going to give some kind of basic back process setting before we get into the meat of what you can apply for and how you can apply and what it is that the COC application process will look like and what we're looking for. As the COC collaborative applicant, we are able to apply to the federal government through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for Continuum of Care funding resources for the community. We do that on behalf of nonprofits in the community, a number of whom already receive Continuum of Care homeless assistance funding. Each year, HUD tells every continuum of care in the country, of which there are hundreds. In Delaware, there's only one, how much money we can ask them for that year through the Continuum of Care funding program. They tell us how much money we can ask for to continue to operate the current projects that are already operating using those dollars. And they also tell us how much new money we can try to get from them through a competitive process. And that new part of the money is what we're going to be focusing on and talking about today. Any organization that is eligible and attends today's meeting can apply for those funds through the process here in Delaware. And in order to be eligible, you need to be a local government or instrumentality of local government. That would include state government or a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I'm going to go through the slides and the information, and I'll pause at times, probably because I'll be a little bit tired of talking and hearing myself talk, to make space for you all to ask questions. But outside of that, not going to really be monitoring the chat for questions throughout. So if something I'm talking about brings up a question that you have that you want to make sure gets addressed today, please jot it down, remember it, whatever works for you, so that when it is question and answer time, you're prepared to ask. So at the time that we put out the RFP a couple of weeks ago, HUD had not yet released the notice of funding opportunity formally. But on July 31st, they did. And so now we have a better understanding of how much funding they're allowing us to apply for. So the information that I'm sharing today is updated from the original RFP that was released on July 23rd. None of the meat content of the RFP has changed in terms of the type of projects, the type of funding, how it can be used. But we have a better idea now of the amount of funding that we're allowed to apply for than we did when it was first published. An updated corrected version with these new numbers in it has been posted to the Continuum of Care funding page of the Housing Alliance Delaware website. So the new updated RFP with these dollar amounts is available on our website. So there are two pots of new funding that we can apply for. A little over 1 million is how much we should be able to apply for in what's called Continuum of Care bonus dollars. Again, that's new money that we are working to bring to the community to fund homeless assistance housing programs in Delaware. HUD also makes a separate pot of bonus funds available specifically and only to serve individuals and families who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. The total amount this year will be approximately $865,000 in DV bonus dollars that we are allowed to request from HUD as a COC. So RFP was released on July 23rd. The new project application is due to us here at Housing Alliance by 4 p.m. Friday, August 16th. So next week, Friday, by 4 p.m. Anyone who submits the new project application Before that deadline, your application, your project proposal will be reviewed by the Continuum of Care Funding Committee. It is a committee of folks who review all COC funding proposals, new and renewal, and make decisions about what applications to submit to HUD to request funding for, and how much funds for each project, and all the decisions that go into that process of submitting to HUD. So a new applicant that comes in for a new project will be notified sometime in September if their project is being or has been selected by the funding committee to be included in our community's application to HUD for those federal funds. And then there will be a second part of the process. So when you're thinking about applying, you want to think about making sure that you would have the capacity to complete a second part of the process, which is that if you are selected locally as a result of the application that you submit to us next week, you will then need to, and we provide a lot of technical assistance and support in this area, especially if you've never done it before. We help you do it, but you'll need to submit a new project application in HUD's online system that's called eSNAPS. A lot of the questions that you're going to be asked in your project application are also questions or similar to the questions that you'll be required to fill out for HUD in their online system. But that is a second part of the process that if you are selected by the local funding committee, you will need to complete. And again, we will help and support you through that process. We have a little bit more time than we thought we would this year to get that done. So hopefully it won't be too much of a crunch. For those of you, I know there are some folks here who have submitted new project applications in the past. You know that by the time the decision's made and the time that that online application to HUD needs to be completed can be kind of time intensive. We do our very, very best to make sure that you and we have as much time as possible in between those two things, but it can be a little bit of a time crunch. We have to operate on HUD's deadlines. So how are you going to submit your application? Again, by Friday, August 16th at 4 p.m. The submission must include all submission materials, which we're going to go through, which includes the project application and any attachments and supporting documentation. And it's going to be an email submission. So keep it easy. Email it to myself and Aaron. Aaron, wave hi. Emailing it to rstucker and egallagher@housingalliance.org before 4 p.m. A couple of things to keep in mind before we get into the details. The goal of Continuum of Care funding is to end homelessness for people and families, quickly helping them move out of homelessness and into housing, and providing the wraparound supports that they need to remain housed, whether those supports are temporary, light touch supports, whether they are intensive and ongoing supports. The goal is to rehouse homeless people and families as quickly as possible and support them to maintain their stable housing. Funding is competitive and is limited. As I talked about, HUD tells us how much we can apply for, and then to make things even more complicated, we have to decide what order to request those things in and what projects to prioritize over others in our application to them. So it is competitive and limited. If we were able to, we would want to ask HUD for funding for many, many more projects than what we'll be able to ask HUD for. So keep that in mind. You want to make sure that your project is, well thought out, that the responses are, that you're really responding to the questions that are asked in the application so that we know that we can articulate to HUD how this project is going to make an impact on people and families who are homeless in Delaware. Any project that is funded with Continuum of Care funds is required to enter all client level data into CMIS, which is the data system that is administered here in Delaware, and required to participate in centralized intake, with the exception of DV bonus projects, because of privacy rules and rules at the federal level that actually prohibit victim service providers from entering client level information in the CMIS system, sorry. Another thing to keep in mind is that Housing First is a required component of these projects. All projects that are COC funded are expected to operate using a Housing First approach and model. And we'll just talk a little bit about what that is. I think many of you are familiar. I'm not going to go, could be a 5-hour training. We're not going to go into depth here on Housing First. But broadly and generally, Housing First is an approach to quickly connecting individuals and families who are experiencing homelessness to permanent housing. And by permanent, we mean housing with a lease. So they're a tenant in housing without preconditions or barriers to entry, such as sobriety, treatment, or service participation. So regardless of whether someone is using or someone has agreed to go to treatment or to participate in case management assistance, or has gotten a job, that those things aren't prerequisites to housing, that housing itself is treatment, housing itself. And once folks are housed, then we're providing them with the case management support services and tools that they need to remain stably housed. The other so there's the housing component of Housing First, but the services are extremely important as well, that support services are offered to everyone in housing and to help them move into that housing that are designed to maximize housing stability, prevent people from losing their housing, and really work with folks on the goals that they set for themselves so that they can stay stably housed and not return to homelessness. So some of the main components of Housing First programs are that they're low barrier admission to the program, few or no programmatic prerequisites to getting access to housing, and that access to housing is rapid and streamlined. Supportive services are offered using assertive engagement strategies, right? So staff are really trying to engage with folks, reaching out to folks, building relationships with the people in the program, and offering the types of support services that are available in the community that could help that person. But that those supportive services are voluntary on the part of the client. I know folks who do Housing First a lot like to say the support services are voluntary for the client and mandatory for the case manager or service provider. It's another way to think about it. Tenancies have full legal rights and responsibilities and legal protections of tenancy, and that evictions are avoided whenever possible. So those are some of the main components of Housing First. There are certain program types that can be funded under with the new COC bonus money. These are all outlined in the RFP, and I'm going to walk through them here. So the first program type that can be funded with these dollars is permanent supportive housing. In permanent supportive housing, the person has a permanent rental subsidy, which means it is not a 1 year, you're not paying rent for 3 months or 6 months or 12 months. As long as that person is in the program and in the housing, they're receiving that rental subsidy. The person is on a 12-month lease, Housing First model of operating. And there are multiple different ways that that housing can be organized in terms of administratively and how it's paid for through leasing, master leasing, or tenant-based rental assistance in scattered site units. Happy to talk more in detail about that with folks who want to understand that better and learn more about it. If there are questions at another time during the presentation. And permanent supportive housing, housing stability services are provided, as I talked about, assertive engagement. So really working to develop the types of relationships with folks that allow for deep, meaningful service provision and access to the supports people need. And those services are provided in the housing units where people are living, as well as outside of those units in the community. But that there is a component by which staff are visiting people in their homes, making sure that they're maintaining their units, supporting them with things that they need to have to be happy and healthy in their housing. And client eligibility for permanent supportive housing are people and families experiencing homelessness, HUD Category 1. When we talk about HUD Category 1, we're talking about people who are sleeping outside in their cars or in other places not meant for human habitation, like abandoned buildings, encampments, bus stations, etc., or sleeping in emergency shelters for people experiencing homelessness, where the head of the household has a disabling condition of some kind. So people with disabilities who are experiencing HUD Category 1 literal homelessness. Additionally, it is the expectation in Delaware that permanent supportive housing projects, and I'm not going to go into all the details here, but you should expect that if you are applying for permanent supportive housing with new bonus funds, that you are also not only expected to serve people who are literally homeless with disabilities, but that those folks will meet HUD's chronic homeless definition. which means there's an additional component in terms of length of time homeless. So these are folks who have been sleeping outside or in emergency shelters or other places not meant for human habitation, like cars and parks, for 1 year or more. So for long periods of time. Chronic homelessness is expected in Delaware of all permanent supportive housing programs as an eligibility criteria for the client. The second program type that can be funded with these dollars is rapid rehousing. So in rapid rehousing, the housing component is tenant-based rental assistance in scattered site units. It is not site-based in a building that you own or operate. You are helping homeless people and families identify and move into apartments in the community and helping to pay their rent. That rent is temporary. It's not permanent the way it is in permanent supportive housing for anywhere from 3 to 12 months, depending on the needs of the household. Again, folks are being served using a housing first model, and the lease that they have with the landlord and provider in the community is a 12-month lease, which would be standard in the community. Again, housing stability services are offered. The intensity of those services depends on the needs of the household. So some folks might not need a lot of support. They really just need that housing help. And time with that rental subsidy, well, they increase hours at their job or identify new employment, or increase their income in some other way. Other folks might need a lot of intensive support services in rapid rehousing. So the intensity and type of support services are really geared to the needs of the person or the family. And again, services aren't only provided over the phone or in an administrative office at your organization. There should be regular visits to the unit to make sure people are doing well, check in on folks. Again, those services aren't usually as intensive in rapid rehousing as they are in permanent supportive housing, but there should be some in-unit component of the services that are being provided. The other really important part of rapid rehousing is that you have staff who are dedicated, spending lots of their time creating relationships with landlords, helping people identify units that will be affordable in the long term, hopefully. I mean, that's knock on wood. That's really hard in this housing environment, but for them and their families, helping them move in, helping them with access, helping them fill out applications for units. The most successful rapid rehousing programs have ongoing relationships with landlords in the community, and they're able to really reach out and partner with those folks to identify open units to move their people and families into that they're working with. And client eligibility for COC funded rapid rehousing are people and families experiencing homelessness, HUD category 1 or 4. Again, 1 being shelters and streets, 4 meaning people fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. The third program component that you can apply for with these funds is the Joint Transitional Rapid Rehousing program type. This program type combines the components of transitional housing with the components of rapid rehousing, hence the Joint Transitional Rapid Rehousing component title. So when someone applies for a Joint Transitional Rapid Rehousing project, they're operating both the transitional units, the places where people are staying temporarily as part of the program. So you have temporary transitional housing units that your program is operating in some way. This is a housing first model. Folks are being offered, hey, here's an open unit in our transitional housing. You can come, you can stay here for anywhere between 1 and 24 months, right? That's the rule on the book. Folks could stay up to 2 years if they need to, while you're also offering that person or family access to rapid rehousing services at the same time. So with transitional rapid rehousing, someone's coming to your program and you're saying, here's a place for you to stay temporarily, and let's start looking for a unit in the community. Let's start talking about where we're going to rapidly rehouse you and how we're going to support you in the community. The goal of transitional housing, rapid rehousing, is that folks have somewhere to be while they are waiting for that rapid rehousing assistance that is safe and stable if they want it. In this component, a person can say, hey, I really want access to help with that rapid rehousing, but I don't really want to stay in your program. I'd rather stay in my car for whatever reason. Maybe it's because it's closer, it's easier for me to get to work, whatever, you name it, or I have a animal and whatever. So someone is offered both the transitional component and the rapid component. Most folks we know from some experience with, we have a joint transitional rapid program for families in Delaware. Most folks will take both transitional and rapid assistance, but folks aren't required to, or someone could say, hey, I'm in this transitional unit. I'm finally feeling safe for the first time in a long time. I need to wait a little while here before I can even think about moving on and moving out. Just give me a minute. Right? So they're not required to accept rapid rehousing help right away either. The goal is to help folks stabilize and move them into housing in the community as quickly as they are ready to do and as quickly as possible. The services in the community, the rapid rehousing component is the same. It's a 12-month lease. It's tenant-based rental assistance. It is housing focused, and you have staff that are both helping people while they're in the transitional component of the program and also helping people identify housing, engage with landlords, and move into units in the community. And then housing is provided, or case management services are provided in that community-based housing. Client eligibility, same as rapid rehousing, people and families experiencing homelessness, category 1 and 4. The domestic violence bonus funds must exclusively serve people fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human and sex trafficking. And folks who want to apply to operate these programs under the domestic violence bonus can only apply for rapid rehousing and joint transitional rapid, not permanent supportive housing. Victim service providers who operate these programs are exempt from using CMIS, exempt from some of centralized intakes requirements. And I'll just note that these projects are not allowed to only serve people fleeing or attempting to flee human trafficking. They have to serve anyone that falls into that full definition that's listed above. If you are an organization that already receives continuum of care funds to operate any one of these types of programs, you can also apply for new funds to expand the work that you're doing. A renewal applicant can submit a new project application to expand operations of your project. For example, if you already have a permanent supportive housing project that can serve, operate 20 units at a time and you want to bring that up to 30, you can apply for additional funds through what's called an expansion grant to add 10 units to your project. That is an allowable thing to do as a renewal applicant. Transition grants are different. This is an application as a renewal applicant, someone who already received COC funds. You can apply for a transition grant to change the project type that you are operating. These types of things should happen in conversation with us here at HAD and the COC team. If you have not yet indicated to us here at Housing Alliance that you are planning to do either of these things as a renewal applicant, please reach out to myself and Erin as soon as possible so that we can talk with you about this more. All right, so before we move into talking about evaluation criteria of the new projects and how you're going to, the information that you're going to provide us with and the Continuum of Care Funding Committee with when you apply and filling out the project application, I want to pause and ask if there are any questions about what we've gone over so far in terms of project types.
I have a question.
Yes.
I seem to be upside down. I don't know.
I was just seeing that.
I don't know how that's possible. I'll turn my video off. Question is, we are a anti-human trafficking serving agency. We are not allowed per our bylaws to serve other types of crime victims. So from what you just said, we would not be eligible for these dollars. Is that correct?
I think that is correct. Okay. Is Christy here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Is that correct, Christy? Christy is our COC funding expert and consultant of ours.
I was just looking at this language, and unfortunately, that is the case. Okay. You cannot use DV bonus funds to exclusively serve victims of human trafficking, survivors, whatever language you would prefer. It can be a subset of, there's an expectation that some human trafficking survivors will qualify under the definition that is used for the DV bonus, but you can't narrow the scope such that you're only serving human trafficking survivors.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, William Brown here. I want to ask, as far as eligibility is concerned, I work with the executive director for the Home of the Brave, and we are a transitional housing program, but we don't have the RRH component. Are we eligible for this funding?
Yes, you can't. So you are eligible to apply for the funding, but you cannot apply for just transitional housing funding. That's not an option under the with the HUD COC funds. So if you were looking, it depends on what you would want to do. If you were looking to become a transitional rapid rehousing project, then yes. If you were looking to create a new project, if you're asking whether you could apply for funds just to operate your existing transitional project,
Correct. Yes.
then
Yes.
the answer, yes, then the answer would be no.
Okay, that's all right. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Hello, I'm Jacqueline Sturbach. I hope you can hear me.
I can. Thanks, Jacqueline.
A pleasure to be with everybody today. I wanted to clarify, we are, What Is Your Voice? We are a domestic violence agency. It's been here about 10 years, and we have low-income transitional housing opportunities that we're trying to open, and we're in the process of building. But I just wanted to visit the qualifications. So we are serving all those different attributes of victims of domestic violence. But did I hear you say that we had to take in anybody else besides them to be able to qualify?
No. So if you can apply for a project that exclusively and only serves people fleeing and attempting to flee domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
You do not have to serve other folks. What we were talking about a few minutes ago was related to people who were fleeing human or sex trafficking, which is considered to be different.
Yes, I'm aware of that. I just wanted to clarify. I don't know where I just wanted to clarify it before we went through the whole process. So I'm glad to hear that, Rachel. Thank you very much for that explanation.
Great. Other questions? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to continue. And we're going to talk now about how projects will be about. Judson, were you just coming on camera because you were excited to say hi and see us, or did you have a question?
I had a question.
Okay, go ahead.
I had a question, but I can't. The voice doesn't come on unless the video's on. The question is regarding centralized intake. The referrals that we would get, are they going to be screened for being a HUD Category 1 or chronically homeless? So those
Yes.
would be the only type we would get in. So we would be automatically serving the right clientele.
Yes. However, so yes is the answer, but of course there's and also. So currently the way that it works is we refer, when we make the referral, we've spoken to the household or the client, we're looking at their CMIS record. We've talked to someone in the community who's serving them. Let's say they're working with like an outreach provider, like a PATH outreach provider or someone else in the community, or they're currently in an emergency shelter. We make the referral based on all the information that we have. What we tell providers is if someone shows up and for some reason they're like not eligible, it is like the provider still has some responsibility to ensure that they're serving eligible households. So if someone comes in for their intake or to move in and turns out they in fact are not literally homeless and eligible, it can get a little tricky. We deal with that on a case-by-case basis. As a general rule, you are correct, and that does not happen very often.
Thank you.
other questions? Alicia, I don't know if I'm saying your
Yes.
name.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to find a way to raise my hand with the Zoom, but I could not do it. I wondered, I've been having some trouble with my Zoom, and I am not sure that I heard anything about being eligible to apply for organizations serving returning citizens, like a reentry program. Would they be considered chronically homeless?
It depends.
Okay.
That's a great question. So people retain their chronic homeless status. So people are chronically homeless if they've been in institutions, if they're in an institution currently, whether that's a hospital, a jail or prison, an inpatient treatment facility of some, if they're in an institutional setting, if they've been there for 90 days or less.
90 days or less than they are retaining their homes?
Yes, then they're still considered to be both literally and chronically homeless if prior to going into that setting, they were in an emergency shelter or another place not meant for habitation. Right. So
Okay.
if you think about folks who are going from being in, I'm just going to use some Newcastle County examples, being in like a Meadowood treatment facility temporarily for a short stay, and then out and staying at the Sunday breakfast mission, and then back into some type of treatment facility, and then out back on the street, and then into jail or prison for a short period of time, and then back on, right? That's that group. In terms of reentry, if folks transitioning folks who have been incarcerated for some period of time into the community, that's a bit of a different. The answer would be yes, if they were already exited and homeless.
Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah. So HUD COC funding is not the best source of funding for reentry housing and support services, because
Okay.
there is that like clash between the definition and, like, if you're trying to do planning for folks to reenter, it's not the best source of funds to be able to use for that.
Okay.
And Christy, I'm going to put you on the spot again and ask if you think that there's a better way to answer that question, or if you think I got it.
It's a challenging question. No, I think you did a good job. I do think might want to distinguish between the PSH who can be served and rapid rehousing and who can be served, because PSH has the chronic homeless definition related to it, whereas rapid rehousing does not. So I don't know if you would want to talk about that, Rachel, but.
So yes. So again, if the target population of the project was those folks who are in and out of these systems of care regularly without the intervention they need to stabilize, that would be kind of that chronic population. For rapid rehousing, there is not that chronic homeless definition, but there still is the literal homeless criteria. Christy, I saw you on mute.
No, I was just going to say that's correct. And it just, unfortunately, it sort of depends on who your target is. If you were looking at folks who had re-entered and then experienced homelessness, then it's more like yes. But if you were looking at, we want to capture folks before they become homeless, right? Maybe they have a history of that, and they're about to re-enter. This is really not the best source of funding.
Okay. I appreciate your help. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for your help too, Christy.
So there was a question in the chat asking, what would you recommend, EHV's question mark, and then could you review the rapid rehousing eligibility? And then that they are also coming from Maryland. How is the rapid rehousing definition eligibility determined in this COC?
Ruth, I don't understand what you're referring to when you say, what would you recommend EHV? If you want to come off mute and ask that question, that would be helpful, or provide some more context to it.
Thanks, Rachel. And I'm from Catholic Charities, Diocese of Wilmington. So sorry, it's not in my byline there. Emergency housing vouchers, or what would you recommend for someone that is coming in, returning citizens? If COC or PSH isn't the best option? Thanks.
That's a great question, and I'm wondering if there's someone else here who can better answer that question. I know that there are re-entry funds that come through the CJC here in Delaware, the Criminal Justice Council. They play a similar role in re-entry funding, I believe, as we do in terms of the HUD COC funding. Although my info on that might be a couple years old. But if someone asked me that question, the first place I would go to was the CJC, the Criminal Justice Council. But does anyone else here have a better idea? Feel free to help me answer that question. That was a good one, Ruth. I'm sorry, I'm not nearly as knowledgeable about those funding sources.
I will just throw out that there are times where the Department of Justice makes available what's called Second Chance Act funds. And some of those funds have been in recent rounds sort of dedicated toward housing. We're looking at projects that would support connections between like the criminal justice system, folks re-entering from the criminal justice system and the homeless system, and seeing some interesting projects get funded under Second Chance Act funds.
Thank you, Christy. Tiffany, I saw your note in the chat, and we can definitely send you the exact language from the NOFO. It's very similar to the language I had in the slide about exclusively serving. But yes, we can definitely, someone can put that in the chat where you can find that exact language. All right, I'm going to move on to how we're evaluating your project applications should you choose to submit one. Oh, and you know what? Actually, before I do that, I'm sorry. Ruth, you asked some other questions about rapid rehousing eligibility. Aaron put our standards in the chat, a link to our rapid rehousing and PSH standards in the chat. Rapid rehousing eligibility in Delaware is Category 1 or Category 4 HUD homeless definition. So literal homeless status, meaning sleeping in an emergency shelter or a place not meant for habitation, or fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. And then we prioritize through our coordinated entry system, which we call centralized intake, based on a couple of different criteria. Folks who've had multiple homeless episodes, length of time homeless, and other things that you can find in the standards that Aaron linked in the chat. And those are worked through our coordinated entry system. All right, evaluation criteria for new projects. So I hope that if you're interested in applying, you've already taken a look at the application itself. It is available, and all of the other documents that you need are available on our website, which Jessica and Aaron, someone will put that link directly in the chat. It is in the RFP as well. It is on this slide these slides as well, which you'll get after this. But the funding page of our website has all of this documentation on it, and the actual application that you will fill out and submit. New project applicants will be evaluated on their experience and capacity. If you're an existing renewal applicant, meaning that you already operate COC funded projects, your past performance, the performance that you are getting for folks in your existing projects will be considered in your new application. The scope of the project and the need that the project will address, the budget and the budget narrative, your explanation of how you will use the funds. Housing first and low barrier access is worth up to 20 points because it's very important to the COC that folks understand what it means to operate a low barrier and housing first program. You'll be asked to describe how you do that as an organization. You'll be scored on your housing case management plan and services, how you work with folks to help them identify, move into, stabilize in housing. If you intend to operate a scattered site program where you're relying on units that are operated by private landlords in the community, we'll ask you about your landlord relationships or plan to develop those landlord relationships. A really important part of COC funded work is resource linkages, helping people access resources in the community. You are not expected to be all the things to all the people that you serve. So how are you making sure that the people you're serving are getting access to mainstream benefits and resources in your local community? And then there are bonus points available. And we're going to talk about all of these things in a little bit more detail. If I can go in the right direction. All right, so under applicant experience and capacity, which is worth up to 27 points, have you previously operated this project type? Have you previously served this population type or household type? Have you worked with other similar funding sources before? Do you have previous experience complying with public funding requirements or operating projects that use federal funding? So you're going to be asked about all of those things in that part of the application. Well, it is true that if you are an organization that has operated and successfully operated a particular project type for a particular target population or household type, that will help you in this section. I don't want folks who haven't done that before to be discouraged here. This is an open and available process for everyone, even if you don't have experience doing that. Past performance. So again, if you're an existing COC funded provider, we will be looking back at your FY23 APR, asking you about your COC and ESG spending history, asking you to report on key performance measures from last year, and if you've ever been placed on quality improvement, what your history is with that, and whether or not all of those things have been addressed. And this is, again, only relevant to folks who already receive COC funding. You will, of course, also be asked to describe your project. What unmet need is it meeting? How many beds and units are you planning to create or estimating that you are going to create? With rapid rehousing, of course, or scattered site permanent supportive housing, it's a lot harder to, you don't have a set number of site-based units, but how many beds and units are you planning to create? What types of services are you providing? What target population households? Is it families with children? Is it adult-only households? Is it both? This is where you're really going to tell the funding committee what the work is that you are planning to do and how you're planning to operate the project. This is where you're going to tell us what your budget is, what funds you need to make this project work. You're allowed to ask for up to 10% of your budget to be used for admin costs. All projects are required to have 25% matching funds from another source. So if you're requesting $100,000, $25,000 of those, you have to have an additional $25,000 to match that 100 that is used for the same HUD eligible activities that your project is going to do. We're going to ask you to talk about how you're staffing the program and justify the budget. And then we also ask you to include a modified budget. And so what we mean by that is, you know, you can say, hey, I'm applying for all $1.05 million. And if I get all that funding, I'm going to create 100 permanent supportive housing units throughout the state of Delaware. But if you only give me 300,000, here's what we could do with that. We could do 30 units of permanent supportive housing throughout the state. So we're going to ask you to ask for, I really, really want you to ask for what you would need to successfully operate the project and do it well. And then we're going to ask you what would you be able to live with if you weren't able to be, if your full request wasn't able to be met by the committee. This budget worksheet is a required attachment. And again, after we get through this part of the slides, I'm going to show you the full list of things you have to submit as part of your application. The budget worksheet is one of them. This budget worksheet and the RFP are both your sources for how you can use this money that you're applying for and how you can create your budget. The budget worksheet has a lot of great detail in it in terms of, again, what are the line items that HUD funds and what can those funds be used for? So that worksheet's really going to be your key to thinking through how to create a budget that will work for you. As I already mentioned, up to 20 points for Housing First and low barrier access. We're going to ask you to commit to Housing First best practices, describe what that means to your organization and how you plan to implement that in the project. There are lots and lots of great resources about what Housing First is and isn't. Some of those are included at the end of the RFP. There's a lot of links there and resources for you. I've added some here as well to help you and your team understand what's expected if you're not familiar. Housing case management. How are your services funded and provided? They can be funded with COC funds. They could also be funded by other funds in the community. So how are your services provided? How are they funded? How are you helping households access housing and remain in housing? What is your client case manager ratio? And we're going to ask you about implementing client-centered, culturally aware services. If you're a scattered site project, we're going to ask you about partnering with landlords. Do you have experience doing it? How do you plan to do it as part of this project? How are you helping clients access mainstream benefits and health insurance, increase their income, access employment opportunities, all of those things, access, engage in the community, access things that are really important to people to live healthy lives where they're not quite so isolated. So things like libraries and churches, things like food stamps and Medicaid, things like Social Security income, things like support groups and mental health services, all the things that people need to be well and healthy. How are you and your team going to making sure that people are linked to those things in the community? I'm going to talk about bonus points. So in the RFP and the project application, there are up to 10 bonus points available. It is not the expectation that any one project will get all 10 bonus points. And if you are requesting any of these bonus points, you are required to submit documentation along with them. So you can get up to 2 bonus points if you have a clear documented plan for incorporating people with lived experience into the design of your project, the implementation of your project, and the ongoing process by which you evaluate how well your project is doing to meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness. Incorporating people with lived experience and expertise in the operations of projects and the design of projects is a priority of the continuum of care and of HUD. So there's an opportunity to get bonus points there. The next 2 opportunities for bonus points do not, I will say it's very red. It's very red there. I'm sure you see that. Do not submit for either of these 2 leveraging bonus point opportunities without watching this video first. Watch this video. It's only 16 minutes long. So it's not, it's only 16 minutes long. Christy, who is here with us, who's chimed in a couple times here when I've asked her to, was wonderful enough to make this easy to understand YouTube video about something that is like mildly more confusing than it should be, which is how HUD and therefore how us at the COC are thinking about these bonus points. There are very specific criteria used to determine whether or not you get credit for these points. So please watch the video. It outlines that very clearly. There are 4 bonus points available for projects that use healthcare resources to fund or support the project in an amount that's equivalent to at least 25% of the project budget. There are also 4 points available for a project that uses housing subsidies not funded by the COC or by ESG funds for 25% or more of housing units in the project. So an example there would be a public housing authority saying, hey, you're going to rapidly rehouse 15 households a year. We're going to give you 5 housing choice vouchers every year, and we're committing to that as a housing authority, right? So the housing authority is basically paying for 5 out of 15 households that you're housing every year, as an example. Or site-based housing vouchers for permanent supportive housing, or scattered site housing vouchers for permanent supportive housing. That's a very direct contribution of a housing resource. So those are examples. Again, you're required to submit documentation that you have that leverage to get these bonus points, and watch the video before even trying to think about whether or not any of the leverage or matching resources that you have would meet that criteria. I will also add about this that this is really something that HUD cares about a lot right now. And they are offering continuums of care, a lot of incentives to submit new project applications that include either of those two bonus points, healthcare or housing subsidies, the leveraging ones. So it is to your benefit to really consider whether or not that is possible in terms of your project being competitive to get the funds. All right. I'm going to pause. I'm not able to do this and monitor the chat at the same time. Do folks have questions about what we have covered, what I just covered about the application?
Can Ruth, I'm sorry I missed it. Can you just clarify which link that you were requesting in the chat so I can do that for you?
Oh, one of you guys made that magnificent video. I couldn't click on it here, so it had a red hyperlink. It's on your slides, so thank you.
Yep.
The
It is
leveraging video.
Yes.
I
Aaron,
will
just
get right on that.
just this morning I put it on the COC funding page. So you
Oh,
can
I'm on
access it.
that. I'll get it from there.
Yep,
Thank
so you
you.
can access it right there if you scroll
Mhm.
down just a bit.
Thanks.
We do not currently have a PHA that has a local preference in their administrative plan to distribute vouchers in that manner explicitly, Ruthie.
So you'd have to start working interference with your PHA now to get them to put a local preference in there for households in your program, I guess. So now's the time. I mean, you do have FYI vouchers. You have
Yes.
at the state level. I don't know if I think Wilmington just started. But for single adults who don't meet that or families, is it's probably too late now to start.
So, yeah, I would say it depends on what relationships you already have with folks.
Yeah.
In terms of, I personally, again, I don't want to speak, I think you should talk to whoever you need to talk to and try to get whatever, try to make stuff work for yourself. I would think that now would be a little late to start that conversation with folks. But I don't think that you need to have them change their administrative plan to do it. It depends. Each PHA has a bit of a different administrative plan.
Can I just talk a little bit about timing, Rachel?
Yes, go ahead.
So what is needed now is, or by October 30th, let me put it that way, by the time the COC needs to submit the full package, is a real commitment from your housing partner to provide those units. The way HUD funding works, most of the time, new contracts for what we would be submitting this year are not going to come online until at least probably July or beyond of next year, of 2025. So this is all about timing. And so what you want to think about is, can this partner bring those housing resources to the table by the time that project starts, which is going to be sometime in 2025. So I don't know if that helps or not, but right now we need the commitment letter, but the resources don't actually have to be available until 2025, probably mid-year at the earliest.
Thank you so much, Christy. That's a really good point. Yes. 100%. So when the documentation that's needed at the local level and by the time we submit the NOFO, is if you can get that commitment and you have a letter from that entity saying we are committing this amount to this project, that works for the documentation. It doesn't have to be in the admin plan.
Rachel, I've got a question about the 25% match. Can some of that match come from in-kind services from, say, health providers that come on site and provide clinical services?
Yes.
So the way match works is that it has to be for something that is an eligible expense under the COC program already. So sometimes that will be the case and sometimes that won't. And so you just kind of have to make sure that what you're applying as match is actually something that would otherwise be eligible. It's a little bit different for the leverage. The leverage doesn't have that precondition of it has to be an eligible expense. So if you're doing the healthcare leverage, sometimes, depending on what you're bringing as leverage, that can count as match. Sometimes it might not. So some portion of it might be match and some portion might not.
And so
people bring a lot of stuff to the table. And so you really just kind of have to go through it and consider like, oh, is that something that we could have billed otherwise to this grant? And if it's not going to be considered match. If it is, it could be considered match.
Well, okay, related to that, housing services, some of those housing service placement services are coming through a partner, and we have an MOU. Would the value of those case management services be something we consider as a match?
yes, so under the supportive services line in any of these budgets, case management is an eligible cost.
As is housing location, that kind of stuff. And you can look in the budget form to see sort of what the eligible expenses are going to be for that supportive services budget line item.
So the question, okay, so question one is, are those services eligible? But the other is, can they be provided in kind through a partner? And consider that part of the match.
Yes.
Got it.
I have a question.
I will just say, if you're doing in-kind third-party match, just be aware that you're going to need to provide a commitment from that partner so that everyone's clear, like, you didn't just say this partner is going to provide something and they have no idea about it. So HUD wants to see, like, there is actually a third party who's committed to providing that.
Yeah, I think we got that part covered.
Good.
Hello, Jacqueline Sturbach here. I just have a quick question about the previous slide where it talks about an audit. So we're small and under a $500,000, about 650,000 a year. And how does that affect us when we're applying? What kind of audit? I mean, could our income tax that we have done by our accountant and things like that qualify at this point? We're not really at the growth, which I think is $1 million and up. We do get federal funding and state funding through SAMHSA. So I'm just wondering how to approach that. Thank you.
So just to clarify, you're saying that you have not had an audit done.
Correct. We're about 650,000, and I was told the stipulation is you need to be closer to $1 million and up before an audit is mandatory, because they cost maybe $6,000-7,000 to have one done.
So I don't know what I don't know what those rules are for every organization. I don't know if someone else on here, Christy, can speak to that. I think for HUD, my understanding is if you get any, just as a going forward component, if you get any HUD COC money, I imagine there's a requirement that you would have a full audit completed, I believe. So that would be a going forward question. What we would ask for now is, if you do not have that, describe that in the application. We would want to see some type of financial statements.
Right, exactly. That's no problem. We're a 501 and have been for 10 years, so we have all that documentation. But I'm trying to figure out and zero in. So after we receive the funding, then an audit would be required. How we use it.
I believe that's correct for HUD.
Okay, no problem. I have no problem with that. I'm just trying to find out if we had that or a book review now, would that qualify?
I'm not entirely sure about the audit requirement. It really applies to the single audit in particular. So once you cross that threshold, used to be 750K.
I still think it's 750.
I think it might have gone up to $1 million.
Yeah. Yes.
So, but I could double check on that and follow up with Rachel to pass that on to you.
I would truly appreciate it, because I just want to make sure we're in compliance and not have all the box checked, but that one, and then we would be rejected. Best to know upfront how we need to position ourselves, but we're not, we're about 650,000 to date, and that would really help us. Thank you so much.
Yep, we'll look into it. I'll just add that there's a difference between an audit and a single audit. So even organizations that aren't required to complete the single audit still may be expected to have an audit. Which is not as in depth as the single audit. Like our organization was first required to do this because it has to do with how much federal money you're spending. The first time we at Housing Alliance were required to do a single audit was, I think, 2021 or 2022. It wasn't that long ago. But had audits in general done for many years before that. So again, there's different levels.
Rachel, I have a question. We have a third-party CPA that does our financial review, but it's called a review in lieu of an audit because of our size. Is that an acceptable, is it acceptable to have done a review as opposed to an audit? And I can't tell you exactly what the distinction between the two, other than we're small enough that we didn't need to do a full audit.
Yeah, so this is okay. I feel like I should be able to talk more intelligently about this. I am not a CPA. So in my mind, if it's an outside if it's an independent certified financial person who's reviewing your books and presenting a statement, that's what's important.
Good.
Erin, do you want to add?
I do. Basically one of the HUD's requirements is that you have like appropriate and stable financial practices and internal controls. What the committee will be trying to establish is that you have the internal capacity and appropriate practices in place to be able to receive, manage, and administer COC funds. So we'll be looking for like establishment of appropriate practices and internal controls, as well as just making sure that your organization is like financially stable and feasible and will still be in operation to be able to support COC funds when your contract goes into effect, if you were awarded. So if you have not big enough for an audit, or you haven't received one yet, as long as the documentation that you do submit, again, is reviewed by a third party and can kind of meet that standard, that's usually what we're looking for new projects.
Thank you, Erin. I wanted to make sure to share with you all go through briefly. I'm not planning to go through this in detail, but the budget form, this is where you're going to find all that information about what costs are eligible, how you can spend the money that you're applying for as you're coming up with and preparing your budget. And again, the submission of this budget form as part of your application is required. So instructions for how to use the tool are on the first tab. So look through that. But the general info, BLI, so these are the budget line items that you can request funds under. And then each of these goes into detail and lists out the types, the eligible costs. So leasing and rental assistance are specific to costs by county. So depending on where you're planning to operate, this will automatically calculate. If you're planning to do 5 bedrooms of scattered site PSH in Kent County, you put in the 5, it does some calculations and spits some things out. Thanks, Christy, for creating this for us. It'll help you create your budget for the leasing and rental assistance components. If you're applying for operating funds, if you own property and you want to operate that property as permanent supportive housing, for example, you can use those funds on maintenance and repair, taxes, insurance, major systems, security, electric, gas, water, furniture, and equipment. Right, so this is where you're going to find all those line items. And what we're asking you to do as you're coming up with your budget for the new project is it in this document by the eligible costs. So Judson, to your questions about services and matching, again, if case management is eligible, therefore it's eligible as matching, someone to provide in-kind case management. Or other funds that you're using for case management are eligible as match because that is an eligible cost here. So this is all the services that are eligible. And pay attention to the asterisks that are in here. So same with paying for your use of HMIS to buy a laptop, enter data. There is a VAWA cost specific tab here. Again, I'm not going to go in detail about this. This is a relatively new line item that HUD introduced just last year. We currently do not have any COC projects that have funds under this line item. If you are thinking about submitting a project with funds under this line item, please look very closely at it. Please reach out to me or Aaron. I think I'll say me, but maybe I might ask Aaron for some help, and Christy, just to make sure that we're all understanding how you're intending to use those funds and it's complying with what HUD wants. Then you're going to be able to put in, your cannot exceed more than 10% in admin and your match. And that's going to get you to your full proposed budget, which will auto calculate here on the last tab. So this is really going to be a key and important document for you to be using when you're coming up with your project budget and thinking about how you're going to operate the program. I am going to go back to the PowerPoint, and I apologize for moving quickly there. I know it makes some people dizzy. All right, so what are you submitting? You are submitting your required application materials and any required attachments and supporting documents. So for required materials, a cover sheet, a threshold checklist, right? So the cover sheet is telling us the basics about your organization and program. It should be a very quick thing to fill out. Threshold checklist, that's where you're going through and you're telling us, yes, we're a 501c3 or a local government or instrumentality of local government. Yes, we have a SAM and UEI DUNS number with the federal government to be allowed to receive federal funds, right? That's where you're going through and going through all the things that you have to have in place, checking off that you have them. You're submitting that to us with your application. Then the application itself, where you're answering the questions that are going to be scored. And the budget workbook, which we just reviewed. Those are the 4 required application materials that need to be submitted to us as your project application. Your project application is not complete if it does not include the required attachments or supporting documents. So you have to have a letter of commitment for the 25% match. If you as an organization are committing that match, hey, we have a partnership, or hey, we get this grant every year to do this work, the letter can come from your executive director, CEO, that's as an organization, we are committing 25% cash match or in-kind match to the project. It can also come from an external partner as well. Your most recent audit, which we've talked a bit about, evidence that you have a SAM or UEI registration, SAM registration and UEI number with the federal government. Proof that you are a 501c3 or local government or instrumentality of local government. A letter of support if applicable. For organizations that don't have any experience operating the type of project that they're applying for or serving the target population, we're asking them to get just at least one letter of support from a community partner to say, yes, we believe that this person and this agency should receive this funding to do this work in our community. So that's only applicable if you are someone who does not have experience operating the project type or serving the population. Renewal agencies are being asked to submit proof of past performance. Again, that is not applicable to you if you do not currently receive COC funding. And as we already talked about, if you're applying for any of these bonus points, you are required to submit documentation in order to potentially receive them. All of this is on the Housing Alliance COC funding website. This is the same exact slide again that I showed in the beginning. All these materials should be submitted by email as attachments to myself and Erin. Our emails are listed there. Are there any other questions that folks wanted to ask or scenarios you want to present? We've got about 20 minutes, and as far as I'm concerned, it's yours. That's all the information that we were planning to present to you. So if you have questions, now is a great time. You are also free to reach out to us after this.
Hey, excuse me. Hey, Rachel, I have a few
Yes.
questions I want to clarify.
Sure.
Okay, so for questions 2 and 3 under the first section, the applicant, I just want to make sure that I'm reading that correctly. So when you say subgroup, you mean target population, correct?
You mean questions in the actual application?
Yeah, so I'm talking about the two questions where it references, the first one references housing, household composition. So, you know, single or family. And then the second one I'm talking about for the subgroups, it says identified subgroups. So is it something specifically that's identified by the COC? Or are you guys going by the national, like what's already like identify as a subgroup, or there's specific subgroups you're looking for Delaware is what I'm trying to ask.
You're not looking for specific subgroups for Delaware. It's if you're here, I can share my screen too, just to make sure everyone else can understand the answer. So these two questions here in the application. So as Felicia said, number 2 is really talking about household types. So if you're proposing an application that serves families with children, have you served families with children before? Families with children who are experiencing homelessness. Serving families, for example, in adult-only households can be very different. In terms of targeted subpopulations, so there we're thinking very specifically of like if the project is for youth, young adults ages 18 to 24. That's considered a specific subpopulation. Veterans would be considered a specific subpopulation.
EV, like those type of things. So just either one of those under, okay, so for example, if we're coming in for PSH, and are you guys counting chronically homeless as a subpopulation, or would that not count? Okay, got it.
So I would say yes. Well, let me make sure. Let me make sure this isn't described differently on.
Yeah, because that's where I was kind of hung up at, because PSH, I didn't know if you guys were classifying chronically homeless as an actual sub population. Yeah.
I just want to look at the cover sheet real quick and make sure I'm not misspeaking.
Sure.
Hang on a second.
I'm not sure for our local materials, but in eSNAPs, chronic homeless is one of the selections for subpopulation on that screen for the HUD application.
Okay, perfect.
Just pulling up the cover sheet real quick in case it has conflicting information. I don't want you to get confused again. It does not have conflict. Yeah. So chronic homelessness, yes, I would say yes, target population.
Okay, perfect. And then also, if you're already receiving continuum of care funding, do you have to come in as an expansion, or can it come in as a new project? Okay, got it.
You can come in as a new project. You can also, a new project.
All right, perfect.
Either one, whichever one is what you want to do.
Awesome. All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions?
Is it possible to make an appointment?
We may have the time to do that, but we also may not. And I say it that way not to be, so yes, you may request one, and yes, we will try to make ourselves available. Just reach out to send your email saying that you'd like an appointment to talk more in detail about your project to both myself and Aaron, the 2 emails that are on the submission slides. We released a notice of intent a couple of months ago, specifically for the purpose of so that if folks thought that they might be interested in applying this year, they could let us know and we could have one-on-one meetings with them to try to talk through their project ideas and provide some education and technical assistance. Not everyone sees that and gets it. It's very different than an RFP. So I understand that's not always possible for everyone, or not everyone, doesn't come up the same way for folks in terms of a priority. I only say that because we may or may not have the time to provide as much technical assistance and support as may be helpful. That's part of why we started the notice of intent process for the first time, I think last year, or maybe it was the year before. Because we found that folks trying to come in new really needed some additional support prior to this point. So please reach out, yes, and we will talk more.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Just really quickly, as far as the corrective action, how exactly much is that weighted? Like, are you guys weighting it based off of if you have one or not, or if you like completed it, accomplished it, and addressed the issues? Like, how are you guys kind of evaluating that, or the committee?
Yeah, hold on, let me. So on the website, the scoring rubric is available. And that will show you specifically how many points, like what it is literally the rubric that the committee is using to score projects. So again, I want to make sure not to speak incorrectly here. And it breaks it down in more detail. Past performance. Let's see. So you can find the answer there. Okay, cool. I'm not making that up in my head. So the scoring rubric will show you exactly if you want to get, make sure you're as competitive as possible. This document, which again is also on the website right next to the project application, will show you how the committee is scoring really down to the point level, how they're expected to score. So past performance, Felicia, corrective action plan, quality improvement, this breaks it down for you. So if you had a project on corrective action in the last year and the issues weren't resolved, you get 0 out of 2.
I got you. Thank you.
Yep. Other questions? Concerns, comments? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, for your interest in newly serving, continuing to serving more of this really, really vulnerable, important population in our community. Please reach out if you need anything from us, have any questions. It was great to see you this afternoon. Maria, I think I just saw your hand as I was saying that.
I was just waving bye.
Oh, you're waving bye. Okay. Okay. Bye, Maria. Bye, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, Rachel.